My brother told me not to come to his rehearsal dinner. When I asked why, my mom said, her future in-laws are very accomplished. He doesn't want you there because your blue-collar job would embarrass the family. I just said quietly, I understand. 6 days later, they saw my name on that screen and froze because my brother's future father-in-law was. Before I tell you about the explosive outcome of that night, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. I was 30 years old, and my knees were pressed hard into the unforgiving concrete floor of a sprawling medical office building in Cool Springs when the phone call came. It was a Thursday evening in mid-March, the kind of evening where the air outside still carried the bitter, biting chill of late winter. I had fine copper shavings dusted across the thick canvas sleeves of my Carhartt jacket, and a fresh, angry red blister was forming on the pad of my right thumb from a stubborn compression fitting I had been wrestling with for the better part of an hour. The smell of strong pipe cement, metallic dust, and cold damp concrete hung heavy in the air around me. It was the distinct smell of my everyday life, the smell of the massive commercial business I had built from absolute scratch with my own 2 hands. My phone buzzed violently against my thigh, vibrating through the thick denim of my reinforced work pants. I pulled it out, wiping a dark streak of grease from the glass screen with the back of my wrist. Mom. I answered on the second ring, clamping the phone awkwardly between my ear and my shoulder as I reached down for my heavy steel pipe wrench. Hey, Mom. I'm still on site working. What's going on? She started with the weather. She asked if the roads were icing over out in the suburbs. She asked if I had eaten a proper dinner yet. It was the familiar, stalling, nervous cadence of a woman who had practiced a very specific speech in her bathroom mirror and was suddenly losing her nerve to deliver it. Then her voice shifted. It dropped into a careful, delicate, almost fragile register, the exact tone she always used when she was trying to manage a difficult situation or manipulate an outcome. You know, Carter's rehearsal dinner is next Saturday, she said. I know, I replied, tightening the brass fitting until it groaned. I've got my suit pressed and ready. I'm looking forward to it. A heavy, suffocating silence stretched across the cellular line. I stopped turning the wrench. I could hear her breathing on the other end. Carter has been a little anxious about the dinner, she finally continued, every single word sounding measured, weighed, and heavily filtered. Chloe's family is flying in from Dallas. Her parents, her grandmother, her aunt and uncle. They are very accomplished people, Matthew. Her father is Richard Alderton. I knew the name perfectly well. Anyone who worked in commercial construction, large-scale contracting, or real estate development anywhere in the Southeast knew the Alderton name. Alderton Properties had been building luxury hotels, high-rises, and multimillion-dollar mixed-use developments for 3 solid decades. But I didn't say any of that to her. I just stayed silent and waited. Carter just wants everything to feel perfectly cohesive. My mother pressed on, her voice growing tighter. He wants Chloe's family to have a certain impression of our family. He's worried that if the conversation turns to what everyone does professionally at the dinner table, it might be incredibly awkward. My jaw clenched so hard my teeth ground together. The muscles in my neck pulled taut. I stared blankly at the copper pipe in front of me. She hesitated, letting out a long, shaky breath. Matthew, Chloe's family is very elite, very white-collar. Her mother is a retired surgeon. Her aunt is a federal judge. And Carter thinks that if it comes up that you're a plumber, it might make the evening deeply uncomfortable for everyone. He wants to put his best foot forward. There it was. She had finally said it. The word landed exactly the way it always did when she or my brother said it. Like a dirty word, a shameful family secret that needed to be swept under an expensive rug. So, I'm not invited, I said quietly. It's just the rehearsal dinner, sweetie. She exhaled with relief. You'll be at the wedding. You understand how important this is, don't you? I understand, I said. I hung up. I didn't tell her about the multimillion-dollar company I owned. And I didn't tell her that in exactly 6 days, my brother's future billionaire father-in-law would be the one handing me an award on a stage in front of the entire city. To truly understand the absolute gut-wrenching betrayal of that phone call, you have to understand exactly how this toxic family pattern started. It began exactly 8 years ago, when I was 22 years old and completely lost in life. I was sitting at my parents' heavy oak dining table in our quiet suburban home, the exact same table where we'd eaten every Thanksgiving turkey and had every major family argument for my entire life. My mother was aggressively unloading the dishwasher, the loud clinking of ceramic plates cutting through the quiet evening air. My father, Robert, was sitting deep in his worn leather armchair, thoroughly absorbed in reading the business section of the daily newspaper. My older brother, Carter, the golden child, was leaning casually against the granite kitchen counter, scrolling mindlessly through his shiny new phone. He had just graduated with a degree in communications and was already strutting around like he owned the entire corporate world. I took a deep, shaky breath, my palms resting flat on the cold wood grain of the table. "I'm not finishing my business degree," I announced, my voice echoing slightly in the large room. "I'm dropping out of college. I'm going to apply to the apprenticeship program at the local pipefitters union." My mother set a coffee mug down on the counter so carefully it made absolutely no sound at all. She turned around slowly, her eyes wide with horror. "Apprenticeship?" she asked, her brow furrowing deeply. "Plumbing," I said, holding her panicked gaze. "Plumbers and pipefitters. I want to get my license, work my way up, learn the mechanical trades, and eventually go out on my own and build a real business." My father slowly lowered his newspaper, looking at me over the rim of his reading glasses. He didn't say a single word to defend me. He just stared, looking vaguely uncomfortable, the way he always did when conflict arose, choosing to fade into the background. Carter let out a sharp, incredulous, mocking laugh. "You're joking, right? You want to unclog toilets for a living? Matt, you're 2 semesters away from a real degree. Don't be an idiot. It's not just unclogging residential toilets, Carter." I shot back, my face flushing hot with defensive anger. "It's commercial infrastructure. It's building massive things. It's a solid, honest trade." My mother walked over, her heels clicking sharply on the hardwood, and sat down directly across from me. She folded her hands tightly on the table. Her voice took on that condescending, sickeningly kind tone that made everything infinitely worse. "Matthew, honey, that is brutal physical work, manual labor. You're 22 now. What happens to your body when you're 50 years old? Do you remember your grandfather?" I remembered my grandfather perfectly. He was a union steelworker. He was the absolute hardest working man I ever knew in my entire life. When I stood at his funeral 5 years prior, I remembered looking down at his hands resting in the casket, thick, heavily scarred, and permanently bent from decades of relentless, back-breaking labor. My mother had always viewed his difficult life as a tragic cautionary tale. I, on the other hand, viewed it as a profound badge of honor. A few days later, Carter invited his obnoxious college friend, Samuel, over to the house. I was walking past the living room when I heard Samuel laughing loudly. "Hey Carter, if my sink backs up and smells like garbage, should I call your dropout brother, or does he only handle the glamorous sewage?" Carter just laughed along with him. "Give him a few years, man. He'll be begging me for a desk job when his back gives out." My own brother. I walked away, the divide in my family permanently cast in concrete. The next 4 years of my life were unequivocally the most grueling, physically punishing years I had ever experienced. I was taken under the wing of a master plumber named Joseph, a hardened, 60-year-old veteran of the mechanical trades who had a voice like crushed gravel and hands like tanned leather. Joseph didn't care about my feelings, my family drama, or my background. He only cared about the absolute integrity of the pipe and the perfection of the weld. I showed up to chaotic job sites at 5:30 in the morning, shivering in the freezing, driving rain and sweating through my shirts in the blistering, suffocating summer heat. I crawled on my stomach through dark, rat-infested dirt crawlspaces, waded waist-deep through flooded, freezing commercial basements, and hauled incredibly heavy steel pipes up 6 flights of concrete stairs when the unreliable service elevators were broken down. There were countless nights I came home to my tiny apartment so physically exhausted that my hands would shake violently just trying to fit the key into my front door. But every single day I was learning. I was mastering complex blueprints, understanding advanced fluid dynamics, and learning exactly how to command and lead a crew of hardened men. Meanwhile, my family treated my career choice like a lingering, embarrassing disease they had all politely agreed to ignore. When we gathered for mandatory family dinners, the conversation revolved entirely and exclusively around Carter. When Carter got a minor, insignificant promotion at his mid-level marketing firm, moving from a junior coordinator to a slightly less junior coordinator, and received a tiny bump in his salary, my mother threw a massive dinner party. She bought an expensive, custom-ordered cake, popped imported champagne, and beamed with radiant pride as she talked endlessly to the neighbors about his brilliant climb up the corporate ladder. A year later, at 26 years old, I passed my rigorous, exhausting state board exams and officially earned my master plumber's license. It was a massive, life-altering milestone. It meant I could finally pull my own commercial permits and legally start my own company. I went to Sunday dinner that weekend feeling a rare surge of profound pride, the crisp paper certificate folded neatly in my jacket pocket. "I got my master's license this week," I announced proudly over dessert. My father nodded slowly. "That's nice, Matthew." He took a slow sip of his black coffee. Then he immediately turned his head to my brother. "Carter, how is that new advertising campaign coming along?" The client seemed tough. No one asked to see the license. No one asked what it meant for my future. They asked me how work was in the exact same dull tone you'd ask a stranger about the traffic on their morning commute. Just a polite, empty filler before moving on to things that actually mattered to them. I stopped telling them things after that night. When I hired a corporate lawyer to officially incorporate Hartwell Plumbing and Mechanical as a limited liability company, I went completely alone. I signed the dense legal paperwork in a quiet office, paid the hefty incorporation fees, and celebrated by eating a cheap turkey sandwich alone in the cab of my used, dented work truck. I decided right then and there that I didn't need their applause. I was going to let my massive success make all the noise for me. The real turning point, the singular moment that permanently hardened my heart toward my family's blatant, unapologetic favoritism, happened during my second year of running the business. I was completely desperate. My beat-up, rusted personal truck had finally died for good, the transmission blowing out spectacularly on the side of the busy interstate. I desperately needed a reliable commercial cargo van to carry my heavy tools, copper materials, and welding gear to job sites. Without a working vehicle, my fragile new business was completely dead in the water. I scoured the classifieds and found a used, thoroughly rusted-out Ford cargo van for $5,000. It was incredibly ugly, but the engine ran strong. I didn't have the cash. I had poured every single dime I had into liability insurance, city licenses, and raw building materials. Swallowing my immense pride, I drove to my parents' house to ask for a small loan. I figured I could gently ask for a small piece of the college fund they had saved for me, since I never actually finished my degree, or perhaps an advance on the small inheritance my late grandfather had supposedly left in a trust for us kids. I sat at the kitchen table across from my mother. "Mom, I desperately need a $5,000 loan," I explained, showing her my detailed business ledger to prove I was making steady income and could easily pay her back with interest within 6 months. "I just need a work van to keep the business alive." My mother's face immediately crumpled into a mask of deep distress. She looked away, nervously wringing her manicured hands together. "Matthew, I am so deeply sorry. We just don't have it." "What about the college fund?" I asked gently, trying to keep the desperation out of my voice. "I didn't use the last 2 years of it. Or Grandpa's inheritance. It's all gone," she said, her voice shaking slightly for dramatic effect. "The economy has been incredibly rough. Your father's retirement account took a massive hit. We are stretched incredibly thin right now. We're actually worried about making the mortgage next month. I wish we could help you, but we simply have absolutely nothing to spare." I felt terrible for even asking. I hugged her, told her not to worry about it at all, and left. I ended up maxing out 2 high-interest credit cards to buy that rusty white van. 2 weeks later, I stopped by their house to grab some old winter coats from the attic. My parents weren't home. As I walked past the open door of the home office, I saw a thick manila folder sitting open on the mahogany desk. The bold black letters on the top document caught my eye. Bank transfer confirmation. I shouldn't have looked, but I did. It was a bank statement from their primary joint savings account. The account wasn't depleted. It was shockingly healthy. But there was a bright yellow highlighted withdrawal from just a month prior. A massive cash transfer of $40,000. I leaned in closer. The recipient account belonged to Carter. My blood ran instantly cold. I flipped to the next page. It was a printed, glossy business proposal for a mobile app Carter was trying to launch, a ridiculous, bloated social networking concept that made zero financial sense. My mother had taken $40,000 of their savings to fund my brother's pipe dream, a startup that ultimately failed and filed for bankruptcy 3 short months later. She had handed him $40,000 for a complete fantasy, but looked me dead in the eye and cried poverty when I begged for $5,000 to buy a work truck that was actively keeping a roof over my head. I met a young apprentice named Wyatt shortly after, and together we worked 14-hour days, fueled by pure, unadulterated spite. Fast forward 8 grueling, exhausting, yet wildly successful years. I was 30 years old, and Hartwell Plumbing and Mechanical was absolutely no longer just a desperate guy working out of a rusty van. We had 14 full-time, highly skilled, state-licensed employees. We had a pristine fleet of 6 fully branded, modern commercial trucks. We had successfully completed 41 major commercial contracts across the entire state, ranging from complex hospital wing expansions to high-end, luxury restaurant build-outs in the richest neighborhoods. Last year, the company brought in an astounding $1.8 million in gross revenue, and after payroll, taxes, and heavy equipment overhead, I personally cleared a healthy 6-figure salary that completely dwarfed whatever my golden child brother was making at his comfortable corporate desk job. My absolute crown jewel was the Averly Hotel project. It was a massive, extremely complex, 11-month boutique hotel renovation right in the heart of downtown Nashville. We gutted the entire antiquated mechanical system and rebuilt it flawlessly from the ground up. I worked directly with the developer's senior project manager, an incredibly sharp, no-nonsense guy named Dylan. Dylan respected me deeply because I never missed a single deadline. My crew's work was visually and mechanically perfect, and I solved massive structural problems before they ever reached his desk. I was actively building a massive, enduring legacy. But in my family's willfully blind eyes, I was still just stuck in the mud. Every single Sunday dinner was a brutal masterclass in psychological endurance. I would sit at the dining table in a clean, expensive button-down shirt, my hair cut sharp, feeling the quiet, solid confidence of a wealthy man who held his own destiny. But the questions they asked me never, ever changed. "Matthew," my Aunt Susan would say, peering at me critically over her expensive glass of red wine, "my kitchen garbage disposal is making a horrible rattling noise. Do you think you could come over and take a look at it this weekend?" "I'm a commercial contractor, Aunt Susan," I would say patiently, keeping my voice level. "We mostly do large-scale industrial builds. But I can gladly give you the number of a really good residential guy who can fix it." "Oh, it's just a quick fix," my mother would immediately chime in, waving her hand dismissively in the air. "You're always getting your hands dirty at work anyway. What's one more clogged drain for you?" I would just smile a tight, closed-mouth smile and continue eating my food. They didn't know a single thing about the Averly project. They didn't know about the millions in revenue. They didn't know because they never, ever bothered to ask. They had placed me in a tiny mental box marked blue-collar failure a decade ago, and they firmly, stubbornly locked the lid from the outside. I let them believe whatever false reality they wanted to believe. I was perfectly comfortable operating in the shadows. But the shadows were about to violently disappear. The massive storm began brewing in earnest at a celebratory family dinner in late August. Carter had invited everyone over to an obscenely expensive, high-end downtown steakhouse to officially announce his engagement to his girlfriend, Chloe. Chloe was genuinely sweet, highly intelligent, and completely, blissfully unaware of the incredibly toxic dynamics of our family. Carter was practically glowing with smug satisfaction, wearing a brand new, custom-tailored Italian suit and an obnoxiously large, expensive watch he had definitely put on a high-interest credit card. He spent the first 40 agonizing minutes of the dinner loudly bragging about his new salary bump and how he was now supposedly handling critical key demographic integration for his marketing firm. But the really, truly exciting news, my mother said, practically vibrating with overwhelming pride as the waiter cleared our empty salad plates away, is Chloe's incredible family. Carter, have you told Matthew about Chloe's father yet? Carter puffed out his chest, adjusting his silk tie. Chloe's dad is a major, heavy-hitting real estate developer. He owns massive commercial properties all over the entire Southeast. He doesn't just own properties, Carter. He literally shapes the skyline of the city. My mother aggressively corrected him, her eyes wide with unadulterated reverence. She eagerly pulled out her smartphone. I looked him up extensively on Wikipedia today. His name is Elijah Alderton. He is the billionaire founder and CEO of Alderton Properties. I had a large sip of ice water in my mouth, and it took every single ounce of physical self-control I possessed not to violently choke on it. I swallowed hard and set my crystal glass down on the white tablecloth very, very slowly. Elijah Alderton. I stared blankly at my mother, then slowly shifted my gaze to Carter. Alderton Properties? I asked, forcing my vocal cords to remain perfectly, chillingly neutral. Yes, Carter said, a sickeningly smug little smile playing on his lips. You probably haven't ever heard of him, Matt. He deals exclusively in high-level, elite corporate real estate. Massive boardrooms, multimillion-dollar acquisitions. Not exactly the kind of dirty places you work in. My mind raced at 1,000,000 miles an hour. Elijah Alderton was the sole, absolute owner of the Averly Hotel. He was the man whose bold signature was on the bottom of a $400,000 contract I had just flawlessly fulfilled. His massive corporation had literally just cut a huge, six-figure check to Hartwell Plumbing and Mechanical 3 days ago. I had spent the last 11 months of my life meticulously building the complex guts of his prized possession. I looked at my older brother, sitting there in his tailored suit, dripping with unearned arrogance, entirely, hilariously oblivious to the fact that the plumber he was relentlessly talking down to was a highly valued key contractor for his future billionaire father-in-law. No, I lied smoothly, picking up my heavy silver fork and cutting into my steak. I haven't heard of him. Sounds very impressive. I decided right then and there. I wasn't going to say a single word to correct them. I was going to sit back and let this play out entirely. I was going to let Carter build his fragile house of cards as high as he possibly could before the wind blew it all down. A few weeks after that infuriating engagement dinner, I was back on the grueling daily grind. The Averly project was officially wrapping up, but Alderton Properties was already quietly taking exclusive bids for Phase 2, an absolutely massive expansion into a neighboring historic brick building. It was a highly coveted, incredibly lucrative contract, the kind of job that could easily double a company's revenue in a single fiscal year. I wanted it badly, but I certainly wasn't the only one circling the waters. Nathan, the aggressive owner of a rival mechanical firm across town, was completely desperate for the Alderton contract. I knew through the tight-knit industry grapevine that Nathan was going through a remarkably brutal divorce. His angry wife was legally taking him to the cleaners, and a very messy, highly publicized custody battle over his 3 kids was rapidly draining his personal and business finances dry. He desperately needed this massive job just to keep his sinking company afloat, and total desperation makes weak people play incredibly dirty. I arrived at the muddy job site trailer early one rainy Tuesday morning to find Dylan, the Alderton senior project manager, looking incredibly grim. He silently slid a piece of official city paper across his messy metal desk toward me. Nathan's firm just submitted a bid for Phase 2 that undercuts yours by a massive 20%, Dylan said, crossing his arms over his chest. And worse, he also just submitted a formal, Anonymous complaint to the city building inspector claiming your crew intentionally used cheap, non-compliant PVC routing on the third-floor high-pressure drainage system. My jaw tightened until my teeth ached. That's an absolute lie. We used heavy-grade cast iron, exactly to the city code, exactly as you spec'd it in the blueprints. I know it's a lie, Dylan said, heavily rubbing his temples in frustration. I walked that entire floor with you myself. But Nathan is desperately trying to muddy your pristine reputation with the big boss. Mr. Alderton is notoriously meticulous. He absolutely hates construction delays and he violently hates compliance issues. If he even suspects for a second that you cut corners to save a buck, you're out. Permanently. Let the city inspector come, I said fiercely, leaning aggressively over the metal desk. Let him cut open the drywall. Let him shine a flashlight on every joint. My work speaks for itself. The city inspector arrived unannounced 2 days later. He meticulously reviewed the entire third-floor plumbing system for 4 hours and ultimately gave it a perfect, flawless passing grade. Nathan's pathetic sabotage attempt failed miserably, but it served as a stark, glaring reminder of the cutthroat corporate world I was successfully operating in. I was actively fighting off desperate, ruthless corporate sharks on a daily basis, proving my immense worth in heavy steel and perfectly welded copper. And yet, in my brother's incredibly narrow eyes, I was still just a pathetic guy with a rubber plunger. That brings us directly back to that terrible phone call in March. The unforgettable call where my own mother permanently banned me from the rehearsal dinner because my blue-collar existence would supposedly embarrass the mighty, flawless Alderton family. The night of the rehearsal dinner arrived. I didn't sit at home on my couch feeling sorry for myself. I drove my heavy F-250 truck to a late-night commercial restaurant build-out in East Nashville. The demanding client had requested a very last-minute, incredibly complex change to the massive stainless steel hood vent specifications, and I needed to get it perfectly done before the Monday morning city inspection. My loyal foreman, Wyatt, was there waiting for me. He was aggressively wiping down a heavy pipe wrench with a greasy red rag when I walked through the plastic sheeting. He looked up at the clock on the concrete wall, then looked back at me in total confusion. "Hey boss," Wyatt said, his brow furrowed. "I thought you had your brother's super fancy rehearsal dinner tonight? Why the hell are you standing here in steel-toe work boots?" I threw my heavy canvas tool bag onto a stainless prep table. It hit the metal with a loud, echoing thud. "Change of plans, Wyatt. I wasn't invited." Wyatt completely stopped wiping the wrench. He knew all about my toxic family dynamics. He had been working side by side with me since the Rusty Van days. "What do you mean you weren't invited? You're his blood brother. You're in the wedding party." "Carter firmly thinks my job isn't quite up to the elite standards of his future in-laws," I said, grabbing my clear safety glasses. He didn't want the horrible awkwardness of explaining what I actually do for a living to a room full of doctors and judges. Wyatt stared at me, his face twisting in absolute, visceral disgust. "Are you kidding me right now? Matt, you run a multimillion-dollar commercial operation. You employ 14 highly paid people. You have much better health insurance than he does." "He doesn't know that," I replied, turning the valve on the torch. The bright blue flame hissed loudly to life, casting harsh, dancing shadows against the unfinished drywall. "And tonight, I really don't care. Let's just get this vent sealed and go home." We worked relentlessly until almost 10:30 at night. My muscles ached deeply. My hands were raw and bleeding slightly from the sharp sheet metal, but the work was absolutely perfect. When we finally finished, we sat on the lowered tailgate of my truck in the empty, dark parking lot, eating greasy drive-through burgers under the harsh, buzzing glare of a street lamp. My phone vibrated in my pocket. It was a text message from my mother. "Hope you're having a nice, quiet night." The dinner was absolutely beautiful. Carter and Chloe are so happy. She didn't say she missed me being there. She didn't apologize again for cutting me out. She just desperately wanted to alleviate her own crushing guilt by pretending everything was perfectly normal. I stared at the glowing screen in the dark for a very long time. Then I quietly put the phone away. I felt a quiet, highly dangerous strength building rapidly in my chest. They wanted to hide me in the dark, but the spotlight was already actively looking for me. The actual trigger for the massive explosion had been pulled 2 months prior to that awful night. In late February, I received a highly unexpected email directly from the executive director of the Nashville Chamber of Commerce. I was sitting alone in my cramped, slightly messy office at the warehouse, reviewing weekly employee payroll, when the notification aggressively popped up on my screen. I opened it absent-mindedly, took a slow sip of bitter black coffee, and then nearly choked on the liquid. Dear Matthew Hartwell, we are absolutely thrilled to inform you that Hartwell Plumbing and Mechanical has been officially selected as a top 4 finalist for the highly prestigious Small Business of the Year award. I read the email 3 full times to make sure I wasn't hallucinating. It wasn't a mistake. The Chamber had officially recognized our explosive 220% revenue growth over the last 4 years, our absolutely flawless safety record, and our massive economic impact on the local community. The Grand Awards Gala was officially scheduled for a Friday night in early April, exactly 6 days after my brother's rehearsal dinner. I immediately yelled for Wyatt to come into the office. When I showed him the glowing screen, he let out a massive whoop that echoed loudly through the entire warehouse and practically tackled me to the floor. We celebrated by buying 40 expensive pizzas for the whole crew. But I didn't tell my family. Not a single solitary word. A week before the gala, I drove to a high-end, exclusive tailor downtown. If I was going to stand proudly on a brightly lit stage in front of the city's financial elite, I wasn't going to look anything like the ragged, dirty plumber my family envisioned in their heads. I spent $1,500 on a custom-fitted, dark charcoal suit, a crisp white silk shirt, and a subtle navy tie. When I looked closely at myself in the 3-way mirror, the man staring back at me wasn't a blue-collar outcast. He was a highly successful CEO. That exact same weekend, I briefly stopped by my parents' house to pick up a specific tie they wanted me to wear as a groomsman for the upcoming wedding. As I walked silently up the concrete steps to the front porch, the wooden front door was slightly ajar. I distinctly heard Carter's voice drifting clearly from the living room. "Mom, you have to make absolutely sure Aunt Susan keeps her big mouth shut at the wedding reception," Carter was saying, his tone incredibly sharp, panicked, and commanding. "I do not need her loudly asking Matthew about unclogging dirty drains in front of Mr. Alderton. Chloe's dad is old, respectable money. He is completely obsessed with prestige. If he finds out my brother is a low-level tradesman who scrapes human grime out of pipes for a living, it's going to reflect incredibly poorly on me." I froze dead in my tracks on the porch. "I've completely handled it, Carter," my mother's voice replied softly, placating him. "I told Chloe's extended family that Matthew works in independent contracting logistics. It's vague enough to sound corporate. We will just actively steer the conversation away from him all night." He had lied to them. He hadn't just hidden me in the shadows. He had actively constructed a massive, complex false narrative to protect his incredibly fragile ego. My own blood brother was treating my very existence like a toxic liability. I didn't knock on the door. I didn't go inside to scream at them. I turned around, walked calmly back to my truck, and drove away into the afternoon. The highly anticipated night of the Chamber of Commerce Gala finally arrived. It was a crisp Friday evening, the air perfectly clear and smelling faintly of expensive cologne and anticipation. The massive event was held at the Lowe's Vanderbilt Hotel, a sprawling, incredibly opulent luxury venue located right in the wealthy heart of the city. I confidently pulled my heavy, work-scarred F-250 truck into the busy circular driveway. The valet, a young kid wearing a crisp red vest, rushed forward immediately. He looked slightly confused and hesitant at the sight of the heavy-duty truck sitting proudly amongst the sleek black Mercedes, silver Porsches, and shiny BMWs, but he took the keys from my hand without saying a word. As I stepped out of the truck, I smoothed the lapels of my expensive charcoal suit. I felt a strange, intensely electric calm washing completely over me. I wasn't an imposter here. I wasn't a fraud sneaking into a party. I had violently earned my place in this luxurious building through years of painful calluses, severe acid burns, and countless sleepless nights staring at complex blueprints. Right by the grand, glass entrance, parked perfectly under the warm, flattering glow of the hotel's exterior lights, was a massive, gleaming, black Rolls-Royce Phantom. The custom license plate read ALDRTN1. A slow, incredibly sharp smile spread completely across my face. He was here. The billionaire Elijah Alderton was inside this very building. I confidently walked through the heavy double-glass doors and stepped into the grand foyer. The air inside smelled strongly of expensive floral arrangements, roasted meats, and the undeniable scent of immense wealth. Beautiful women in sparkling floor-length gowns and powerful men in sharply tailored tuxedos milled about the room, casually clutching crystal flutes of expensive champagne. The soft, elegant hum of a live string quartet played beautifully in the background. I casually grabbed a glass of club soda with lime from a passing waiter in a white tuxedo jacket and stood quietly near the edge of the room, taking it all in. I felt exactly like an apex predator casually walking into a very well-dressed, highly contained cage. I adjusted my silk cuffs, checked my silver watch, and waited patiently for the heavy ballroom doors to open. Part 4.2. Tam Nin Tu Bon So 8 to 620 words when the elegant brass chimes finally rang, signaling the official start of the plated dinner. The massive crowd began to slowly filter into the sprawling grand ballroom. It was an absolute sea of large round tables gracefully draped in crisp white linens, adorned with towering, extravagant floral centerpieces made of navy orchids and gold accents. I easily found my assigned seat at table 8, which was located prominently near the front middle of the expansive room. I sat down confidently next to the CEO of a massive local logistics company and the wealthy owner of a booming tech startup. We immediately exchanged pleasantries, shook hands firmly, and talked briefly but intelligently about local market trends and commercial real estate zoning. I belonged perfectly in this high-level conversation. I spoke their corporate language seamlessly. As the exquisite first course of roasted root vegetables and goat cheese was served, I took a slow sip of my ice water and casually scanned the massive room. It took me less than 30 seconds to find them. Table 19. It was positioned slightly closer to the main stage, a highly coveted VIP table exclusively reserved for top-tier corporate sponsors. Sitting there, looking exactly like a perfect photograph clipped straight from a wealthy society magazine, was my entire family. My mother was wearing a stunning, expensive burgundy evening gown, her hair professionally styled into an elegant updo. My father was stuffed into a stiff gray suit, looking slightly out of his comfort element but trying his absolute best to look wealthy and distinguished. Carter was sitting right next to Chloe, leaning in closely to whisper something into her ear, radiating a nauseating aura of utter self-importance. And sitting directly across the table from my desperate parents was Elijah Alderton. He was a striking, incredibly imposing man in his late 60s, with thick silver hair and the unhurried, dominant posture of a man who owned everything he looked at. He was speaking animatedly to my father, who was nodding vigorously, clearly desperate to impress the billionaire. My mother was laughing politely at every joke, her hand resting gently on Chloe's arm in a gross display of manufactured maternal affection. It was completely sickening to watch. It was a perfectly choreographed, desperate dance of sycophancy. They were flawlessly playing the role of the accomplished, refined, elite family, intentionally burying the messy, blue-collar son deep in the shadows so he wouldn't stain the pristine white tablecloth. They hadn't seen me. Why on earth would they? They weren't looking for me in a place like this. To them, I didn't exist in this world. At exactly 7:45 p.m., the warm lights in the ballroom dimmed slightly. A bright, sharp spotlight hit the main stage, and the president of the Chamber of Commerce, a distinguished older woman with a commanding presence, stepped confidently up to the clear acrylic podium. The low, buzzing chatter in the room instantly faded into a hushed, respectful silence. Ladies and gentlemen, her voice boomed perfectly through the state-of-the-art speakers, rich and authoritative. Welcome to the annual Business Excellence Gala. Tonight, we celebrate the true titans of our local economy. We celebrate the bold innovators, the tireless builders, and the relentless spirits who drive our great city forward. At table 19, I clearly saw Elijah Alderton lean back comfortably in his plush chair, slowly swirling a glass of expensive red wine, looking thoroughly entertained. I saw my mother sit up a little straighter, preparing to politely clap for whatever wealthy stranger was about to take the stage. I set my water glass down on the table. My heart began a slow, heavy, powerful drumbeat against my ribs. The storm was finally here. The president of the Chamber of Commerce adjusted the microphone. The sharp screech of feedback echoed for a split second before settling into a heavy, expectant silence. Every year, we look for a business that doesn't just survive in our city, but fundamentally transforms it, she said. Her voice carried the weight of authority. We look for grit. We look for operational excellence. But most importantly, we look for leaders who build their success from the ground up. I sat perfectly still at table 8. My hands rested flat on my thighs under the white tablecloth. I could feel the steady thud of my pulse in my ears. I kept my eyes locked on the massive LED screen directly behind the podium. At table 19, my brother Carter leaned back, swirling his expensive wine. He looked incredibly bored. My mother was smiling politely, playing the part of the gracious, wealthy guest for Elijah Alderton. Elijah himself was checking his silver watch, likely calculating how soon he could leave this obligatory charity dinner. None of them had a clue. This year's Small Business of the Year award goes to a company that achieved a staggering 220% revenue growth over the last 4 years, the president announced. A murmur of genuine, impressed whispers rippled through the massive ballroom. 220% was a monstrous number in commercial construction. They have maintained an absolutely flawless safety record, she continued, her voice rising with excitement. And they recently served as the lead mechanical contractor on one of the most complex, high-profile downtown renovations in Nashville's recent history, the Averly Hotel project. At table 19, Elijah Alderton instantly stopped checking his watch. His head snapped up. His posture went entirely rigid. He knew that project. He owned that project. My mother frowned slightly, clearly confused by the sudden shift in the billionaire's demeanor. Carter just blinked, completely oblivious to the massive anvil hanging directly over his head. Ladies and gentlemen, the president smiled brightly, opening a gold envelope. Please direct your attention to the screen and join me in congratulating our winner, Matthew Hartwell, founder and CEO of Hartwell Plumbing and Mechanical. The heavy bass of a celebratory pop song kicked in through the sound system. Bright white spotlights swept frantically across the dark ballroom. And there, in massive, bold, 10-foot-tall letters on the main LED screen, was my name. Matthew Hartwell, CEO. Hartwell Plumbing and Mechanical. I didn't stand up immediately. I took exactly 3 seconds to simply watch table 19. I wanted to burn this specific image into my memory forever. Elijah Alderton stared at the screen, then slowly turned his head to look directly at my father. His eyes were narrowed, calculating. He was putting the pieces together. My mother's face drained of every single drop of color. She looked exactly like someone who had just been struck by lightning. Her hand flew up and clamped violently over her mouth. She stared at the screen, then frantically scanned the room, sheer panic radiating from her entirely frozen body. My father physically dropped his reading glasses. They hit his dinner plate with a loud clatter that I could almost hear from 40 feet away. His jaw hung open in utter disbelief. But Carter was the best part. Carter looked like all the oxygen had been violently sucked out of his lungs. His perfectly styled hair suddenly looked ridiculous. His smug, arrogant smirk completely collapsed. His eyes bugged out, staring at the words, plumbing and mechanical, plastered in massive letters right next to his own last name. The fake, polished corporate lie he had carefully spun for his future wife's family was currently burning to the ground on a 10-foot screen. The spotlight finally found me at table 8. The bright beam hit my face, blinding me for a fraction of a second. The entire table of logistics CEOs and tech founders erupted into loud cheers, slapping my shoulders and shaking my hand. I slowly stood up. I buttoned my custom charcoal suit jacket with steady, deliberate fingers. I didn't look like a guy who scraped grime out of drains. I looked like a man who owned the building. I stepped away from my table and began the long walk toward the brightly lit stage. The applause was deafening. 300 of the most powerful, wealthy people in the city were standing on their feet, clapping for the high school dropout who was supposedly throwing his life away. My path to the stage took me directly past table 19. I didn't rush. I didn't look down. I walked with the slow, measured pace of a man who had absolutely nothing left to prove to anyone. As I passed their table, I let my eyes meet my mother's for one single, devastating second. Her eyes were wide, welling up with frantic, terrified tears. She reached her hand out toward me, a pathetic, desperate little gesture. I didn't break my stride. I didn't even blink. I looked right through her, rendering her completely invisible. I walked up the carpeted stairs to the stage. The chamber president handed me a heavy, engraved glass award. It felt cool and incredibly solid in my hands. I stepped up to the acrylic podium and looked out over the massive sea of faces. The room slowly quieted down. 8 years ago, I started, my voice ringing out clear, steady, and loud across the ballroom. I started this company with a $5,000 rusted-out cargo van that barely ran, a borrowed pipe wrench, and a massive point to prove. I heard a few appreciative chuckles from the crowd. When you work in the trades, I continued, my tone growing serious, people tend to put you in a very specific box. They look at the dirt on your hands and they make assumptions about the size of your brain or the scope of your ambition. They think manual labor is the absence of success. But they are entirely wrong. I scanned the room and deliberately locked eyes with my brother Carter. He was shrinking down in his seat. His face flushed a violently dark shade of crimson. Success isn't defined by a corporate title, I said, projecting my voice so it carried all the way to the back walls. Success is defined by the absolute integrity of your work. It's built in the dark, in the freezing rain, in the flooded basements. It's built when no one is watching, and no one is clapping. To my incredible crew at Hartwell Plumbing, thank you. We built an empire out of copper and steel. And to the clients who trusted a guy in dirty work boots with their multimillion-dollar assets, thank you for seeing the real value. I raised the heavy glass award high in the air. The ballroom erupted into a massive standing ovation. I walked off the stage feeling 10 feet tall. The heavy weight of an 8-year-old chip completely fell off my shoulder and shattered on the floor. I had won. I walked down the side stairs of the stage, intending to head straight for the private lobby bar to get a stiff drink. But I didn't make it that far. A tall, imposing figure aggressively pushed past a group of local politicians and stepped directly into my path, effectively blocking my exit. It was Elijah Alderton. The billionaire stood right in front of me. Up close, his eyes were incredibly sharp, missing absolutely nothing. He didn't look angry. He looked entirely awestruck. Matthew Hartwell, Elijah said, his deep, gravelly voice carrying over the loud crowd noise. He thrust his large hand out toward me. I am Elijah Alderton. I own the Averly Hotel. I shifted the heavy glass award to my left hand and firmly shook his hand. His grip was like a steel vise. Mr. Alderton, it is a genuine pleasure to finally meet you in person. Dylan has been a fantastic project manager to work with. Dylan is a good kid, but you are the man who actually saved my schedule, Elijah said, clapping his other hand heavily on my shoulder. He didn't lower his voice at all. He wanted people to hear this. I have been in commercial real estate for 35 years. I have hired thousands of mechanical contractors. The work your crew did on the Averly was the cleanest, most efficient, flawless pipe routing I have ever seen in my entire life. You saved me hundreds of thousands of dollars in potential delays. I stand by my work, sir, I replied smoothly. Elijah narrowed his eyes, a sharp, knowing smile pulling at the corner of his mouth. "You're Carter's brother, aren't you? Chloe's future brother-in-law." I didn't flinch. "Yes, sir. I am." Elijah let out a loud, booming laugh that turned several heads in our direction. He looked back toward table 19, where my entire family was sitting frozen in absolute, terrified shock, watching the billionaire treat the embarrassing plumber like royalty. "Carter told my wife that you worked in independent logistics," Elijah said, shaking his head in sheer disbelief. "He made it sound like you drove a delivery truck for a living. Why the hell didn't he tell us you were the CEO of the most successful mechanical firm in the city? I would have had you at my house for dinner months ago to discuss my new development." I looked right at Carter, who was staring at us from 20 feet away, looking like he was about to physically vomit. "Carter and I operate in very different worlds, Mr. Alderton," I said calmly. "He focuses heavily on image. I focus on infrastructure. I guess he didn't think plumbing was an appropriate topic for polite dinner conversation." Elijah scoffed loudly in disgust. "Image is cheap. Infrastructure is what actually holds the damn building up. Listen to me, Matthew. I am breaking ground on a $90 million high-rise next month. I want your firm exclusively handling the entire mechanical bid. Have your office call my secretary on Monday morning. We skip the bidding war. The job is yours." I firmly shook his hand again. "I will make the call, Mr. Alderton." "Thank you." Elijah turned his back on my family and walked away into the crowd, leaving a massive crater of destruction behind him. This is the moment that changes everything, the moment I finally took back control of my life. Thank you so much for your patience and for staying with me until now. You've been amazing. Please give this video a like and comment one below to let me know you've made it this far. Not only does this help more people find this story, but it also lets me know that my experiences truly mean something to someone. Your support is my greatest motivation to keep sharing the rest of this journey. I barely had time to process the massive high-rise offer before Carter came violently storming through the crowd toward me. His face was a bizarre mix of deep purple rage and absolute, unfiltered panic. "What the hell was that?" Carter hissed, grabbing my upper arm. His fingers dug sharply into my suit jacket. I looked down at his hand. Then I looked him dead in the eyes. My voice dropped to a terrifyingly quiet whisper. "Let go of my arm, Carter. Right now." He instantly dropped his hand, taking a clumsy step back. He was breathing hard, looking around frantically to see who was watching. "You humiliated me," he spat, his voice shaking. "You intentionally humiliated me in front of Chloe's father. You set this whole thing up." "I didn't set anything up," I replied coldly. "I run a successful business. I won an award. You're the one who built an entire fake reality because you were too utterly ashamed of your own blood to tell the truth. That is entirely your problem." "You don't understand," Carter pleaded, the anger suddenly vanishing, replaced by sheer desperation. "Mr. Alderton is obsessed with high society status. If he thinks I come from a family of blue-collar workers, he'll cut me off. He'll convince Chloe to end the engagement. I had to protect my future. I told them you were struggling, that you couldn't hold down a real job. If they find out I lied about you being unemployed." Carter abruptly stopped talking. His mouth hung open. The color completely vanished from his face for the second time that night. I slowly turned around. Standing right behind me, holding a glass of champagne, was Chloe. She had heard every single word. Chloe stared at Carter, her eyes wide with a mixture of absolute shock and profound visceral disgust. She looked from Carter to me, taking in my expensive suit, the heavy glass award in my hand, and the composed, calm demeanor of a man who clearly wasn't struggling. "Unemployed," Chloe repeated. Her voice was terrifyingly calm. It was the calm before a hurricane. Carter stammered, stepping toward her with his hands raised in surrender. "Chloe, baby, listen to me. It's not what it sounds like. You told me your brother was an unemployed freeloader who constantly asked your parents for money," Chloe said, cutting him off sharply. Her voice grew louder, drawing the attention of nearby guests. You told my mother that he had severe anger issues and couldn't hold down a stable job. You banned him from our rehearsal dinner because you said he would ask my father for a handout. I stared at Carter. The sheer depth of his betrayal was staggering. He hadn't just hidden me. He had assassinated my character to elevate his own. I was protecting you, Carter lied, completely scrambling. He's unpredictable. He just won CEO of the Year, Carter. Chloe yelled, her composure finally shattering. My father just praised him in front of the entire Chamber of Commerce. You didn't lie to protect me. You lied because you are an insecure, arrogant, pathetic snob. She slammed her full champagne glass down onto a passing waiter's tray. The glass shattered, spilling pale liquid everywhere. Do not speak to me for the rest of the night, Chloe snapped. She turned on her heel and stormed fiercely out of the ballroom, leaving Carter standing entirely alone in the crowd, his perfect, curated life rapidly crumbling to dust. I didn't stick around to watch Carter hyperventilate. I turned and headed straight for the heavy exit doors. I wanted to go home. The victory was sweet, but the toxic air in this room was suffocating. Matthew, wait. I stopped just short of the lobby doors and closed my eyes, letting out a heavy, exhausted sigh. I turned around. My mother and father were practically sprinting across the patterned carpet to catch up with me. My mother's face was a frantic mask of desperate, artificial joy. My father looked completely bewildered, still clutching his broken reading glasses. "Oh, Matthew, honey," my mother gasped, completely out of breath. She threw her arms out, attempting to pull me into a tight, dramatic hug. I took a sharp, deliberate step backward, holding my hand up like a stop sign. Her arms fell awkwardly to her sides. "Don't," I said. The single word cracked through the air like a whip. Her fake smile faltered. "Matthew, please. We are just so incredibly proud of you. We had absolutely no idea your little business had grown so much. Why didn't you tell us you were working for Mr. Alderton? We could have introduced you properly. We are family. We should be sharing these victories together." I stared at the woman who had birthed me. The sheer, blinding audacity of her words was almost impressive. "My little business?" I asked, quoting her exact tone. "You want to share this victory? Where were you when I was crawling through flooded, freezing basements at 3 in the morning? Where were you when I begged you for a tiny loan to buy a work truck, and you lied to my face while writing a $40,000 check to fund Carter's failed app?" My father physically flinched. My mother's jaw dropped. She had no idea I knew about the money. "Matthew, that was different," she stammered, her eyes darting around nervously. "Carter needed that money for a corporate venture. It was an investment. You just needed a truck. And clearly, you figured it out on your own." "I figured it out because I had to," I said, my voice turning to cold, hard steel. "I built this empire without a single drop of your support. You spent the last 8 years treating my career like a dirty, embarrassing secret. You literally called me on the phone 6 days ago and banned me from eating dinner with my own family because my blue-collar job wasn't good enough for your precious new in-laws. We were just trying to keep the peace." My father mumbled weakly, finally speaking up. "You weren't keeping the peace, Dad." I shot back, locking eyes with him. "You were choosing a side. You chose Carter. You always chose Carter." I gripped the glass award tighter in my hand. "I am not your secret anymore, and I am not your backup plan now that Carter has ruined his relationship. You don't get to claim my success when you refuse to support the struggle. Do not call me tomorrow. Do not text me. I am done shrinking myself to make you comfortable." I turned my back on them. I walked out the heavy glass doors of the hotel, stepped into the cool, crisp night air, and handed my ticket to the valet. I drove my heavy work truck home, leaving my family entirely behind in the wreckage they had built. The next morning, I woke up in my own bed, in the quiet, peaceful house I had bought and paid for entirely with my own money. The heavy glass award sat proudly on my kitchen counter next to my coffee maker. The silence in the house wasn't lonely. It was incredibly validating. My phone buzzed on the counter. It was a text from my father. I am so sorry, Matthew. I am incredibly proud of the man you have become. I should have defended you years ago. I was weak. I hope you can forgive me someday. It was the first time in my entire 30 years of life that my father had ever explicitly apologized to me. I stared at the text for a long time. I didn't reply immediately, but I felt a tiny, microscopic knot in my chest loosen. An hour later, my mother texted, "Please let me buy you coffee. Just 30 minutes. Please." I agreed to meet her at a small, neutral, independent coffee shop across town. When I walked in, she was already sitting in a corner booth. She wasn't wearing her expensive jewelry or her perfectly applied makeup. She looked incredibly tired, entirely deflated, and noticeably older. The arrogant society matriarch from the gala was completely gone. I slid into the booth across from her and ordered a black coffee. "I'm not going to make excuses," she started, her voice trembling violently. She gripped her ceramic mug like a lifeline. "I was wrong. I was horribly, unforgivably wrong about everything. I didn't say anything. I just waited for the truth. When you told me you were going into the trades," she said, thick tears finally spilling over her eyelashes and running down her cheeks. "I didn't just see your grandfather's hands at his funeral. I saw his crushing poverty. I saw the way his body broke down in his 40s. I saw him struggling to pay for basic groceries. I was terrified you were going to live a life of constant physical pain and financial panic. I aggressively pushed you toward corporate jobs because I thought a shiny desk was the only safe place in the world. So you bet all your money on Carter," I stated bluntly. She sobbed quietly, covering her face with her hands. Carter was so confident. He talked exactly like the men on television. I thought he was a guaranteed success, and I was so embarrassed that I had gambled our retirement savings on him and lost it all, that I couldn't bear to look at you successfully building a real business from the dirt up. Your success highlighted my massive failure." I watched her cry. I didn't feel anger anymore. I just felt a profound, heavy pity. She had lived her entire life trapped in a suffocating prison of appearances and societal expectations. "I accept your apology, Mom," I said gently but firmly. "I truly do. But things are going to be fundamentally different now. I demand absolute respect for what I do. If I ever hear a single condescending remark about my crew, my trucks, or my trade, I will walk away from the table and I will not come back. Do you understand?" She nodded frantically, wiping her tears with a napkin. "I promise, Matthew. I promise." We had a long way to go to truly heal, but for the first time in 8 years, we were finally speaking the exact same language. The wedding happened 3 weeks later. It was an incredibly tense, highly expensive affair held at a massive country club estate outside the city. Chloe had eventually decided not to call off the wedding, but it had come with a brutal, non-negotiable ultimatum. Carter was forced to sit down with Chloe's entire wealthy family and confess every single lie he had told. He had to admit that I was a highly successful CEO, and he had to admit his own deep insecurities. It thoroughly shattered his carefully crafted golden boy image. He was signing a prenuptial agreement drafted by their brutal corporate lawyer, firmly ensuring he had absolutely no access to the Alderton family fortune. I attended the wedding proudly as a groomsman, wearing a sharp black tuxedo. During the extravagant cocktail hour, while the jazz band played softly on the manicured lawn, I felt a heavy tap on my shoulder. I turned around to see Dylan, the senior project manager from the Averly job, holding 2 glasses of expensive bourbon. "Dylan," I smiled, shaking his hand. "I didn't know you were on the guest list." "Mr. Alderton invited me," Dylan said, handing me a glass. He took a sip, looking out over the sprawling golf course. "Crazy night at the Chamber Gala, huh? You really blew the roof off the place." "It was definitely a memorable evening," I laughed quietly. Dylan turned to me, his expression turning entirely serious. "You know, there's something you should know about why you actually got the Averly contract in the first place." I raised an eyebrow. "I assumed it was because my bid was competitive." "Your bid was solid," Dylan nodded. But we had massive corporate conglomerates bidding on that job. Companies with hundreds of employees. I actually put your file in the maybe pile because you were a relatively new, smaller operation. So what changed? I asked, genuinely curious. Mr. Alderton personally reviews all final mechanical bids. Dylan explained softly, leaning in closer. He pulled your file out of the stack. He saw that you started as a union apprentice. He saw that you earned your master's license through the local pipefitters union. He completely bypassed the massive corporate giants and pointed directly at your name. I stared at him, stunned. Why? Dylan smiled a wide, knowing smile. Because Elijah Alderton didn't inherit his billions. He didn't go to an Ivy League business school. 40 years ago, Elijah Alderton started out laying bricks as a non-union masonry worker in East Texas. He built his entire empire with calloused hands. He violently hates empty corporate suits who talk a big game. He hired you specifically because he knew you were a real, hardened tradesman who wouldn't collapse under extreme pressure. My mind completely reeled. My brother had been absolutely terrified that my blue-collar roots would offend the billionaire. In reality, my blue-collar roots were the exact, specific reason the billionaire had chosen to trust me with his prized possession. It was the ultimate, perfect poetic justice. The grand wedding reception moved inside into the massive, glittering ballroom. The expensive champagne flowed freely, the towering cake was cut, and the obligatory toasts were made. Carter looked incredibly stiff and nervous all night, constantly hovering near Elijah Alderton, desperately trying to laugh at the billionaire's jokes and continuously refilling his drink like an overpaid waiter. About 2 hours into the heavy dancing, I stepped away from the loud music to grab a bottle of water from the quiet corner bar. Matthew, I turned. Elijah Alderton was walking purposefully toward me, completely ignoring a group of wealthy bankers who were actively trying to get his attention. He looked incredibly sharp in his custom tuxedo. Mr. Alderton, I nodded respectfully. Beautiful wedding. It's a very expensive party, Elijah grunted dismissively, waving his large hand. He leaned his heavy forearms against the polished mahogany bar next to me. I wanted to pull you aside before I leave. Did your office draft that preliminary proposal for the $90 million high-rise downtown? My foreman Wyatt is finalizing the supply chain logistics this weekend. I replied smoothly, shifting instantly into CEO mode. I'll have the complete mechanical bid on your desk by Tuesday at 9 a.m. sharp. Excellent, Elijah smiled, his eyes gleaming with genuine respect. It's a massive, highly complex job. Underground parking, 30 floors of luxury residential, complex pressurized HVAC zones. It's going to require a contractor who isn't afraid to get his boots dirty in the trenches when things inevitably go wrong. I thrive in the trenches, sir, I said confidently. I know you do, son. I know you do. Elijah laughed loudly, clapping me heavily on the shoulder. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement. Carter was standing about 30 feet away near the edge of the crowded dance floor. He was entirely alone. He was watching his intimidating billionaire father-in-law, the man whose approval he had desperately, pathetically craved for months, laughing, sharing a private drink, and talking high-level, multimillion-dollar business with the embarrassing plumber brother he had aggressively tried to hide. Carter's face was a completely tragic mask of profound defeat. He finally realized the brutal, undeniable truth. He might have legally married into the wealthy family, but I was the man the patriarch actually respected. I was the true equal in the room. I didn't smirk. I didn't gloat. I just held my brother's gaze for 3 long seconds, raised my glass of water in a silent, respectful toast, and turned entirely back to my massive, lucrative business conversation. I left the loud, chaotic wedding reception shortly before midnight. I walked out to the quiet gravel parking lot, climbed into the high cab of my heavy work truck, and started the massive diesel engine. The deep, rumbling vibration of the engine felt incredibly familiar, incredibly grounding. I rolled down the window, letting the cool, crisp night air rush in as I merged onto the empty interstate heading back toward the city. The glittering Nashville skyline rose up in the dark distance. It was a beautiful sea of bright lights and sharp angles. And scattered across that glowing skyline, cutting sharply into the black sky, were the towering, illuminated skeletons of massive construction cranes. Somebody was building something new out there in the dark. Somebody was currently grinding through an exhausting 11-month contract. Somebody was desperately trying to make a name for themselves with calloused hands and a burning ambition. I thought about my mother, desperately crying in the coffee shop, finally forced to confront her deeply ingrained, toxic prejudices. I thought about my father, sending a quiet, cowardly text message because he didn't have the spine to say he was sorry to my face. I thought about my brother, trapped in a highly stressful, heavily monitored marriage, forever chasing the hollow validation of wealthy people who would never truly respect a man who only cared about image. They had spent 8 long years intentionally looking right through me. Not because I was small and not because I was invisible, but because they simply refused to look closely at anything that didn't fit into their narrow, shallow definition of success. I looked back at the glowing city skyline. I was a master plumber. I was a CEO. I was a man who built things that lasted. You don't ever have to shrink yourself to fit comfortably at a table that intentionally doesn't want you. If they absolutely refuse to pull up a chair for you, you don't stand there and beg for their scraps. You walk out the door, you pick up your heavy tools, and you build your own damn table. And you make sure it's big enough and strong enough to hold the incredible weight of everything you've earned. Thank you for sticking around and listening to my story. It's not easy revisiting those painful family dinners or the years I spent feeling like a ghost in my own home, but sharing it here feels like finally lifting a massive weight off my chest. I hope this resonated with you in some way. I know how deeply painful it can be when the people who are supposed to love and support you the most are the ones who make you feel the smallest. Have you ever found yourself in a similar situation? Have you ever had to cut out toxic family members or prove everyone wrong by quietly building your own success from the ground up? I really want to hear your experiences, so please share them down in the comments. I read every single one of them. And finally, if you are still here listening to my voice at the very end of this video, you are part of an incredibly special group. I want you to go down to the comments right now and simply type the letter W. That W stands for winner. That is our secret code. It tells me that you are part of the 1% club, the amazing, dedicated people who stayed with me until the very last word, the people who understand that true success is built through hard work, not just handed out. Please hit that like button if you enjoyed the story, and make sure to follow and subscribe so we can stay connected for the next one. Until then, keep your head down, keep working hard, and build your own table. I'll see you next time.